I think that all dominant nations, including, I think, Britain in the past, in the 19th century, have sought to enhance and preserve their power and have sought the control over countries or over resources that is necessary to do this. Ever since oil was discovered in 1869, I think, in Pennsylvania, it has become absolutely dominant, not only for industrial, agricultural, transportation systems, but also for warfare. You cannot fight wars, you cannot have, let alone cheap gasoline in the United States for cars, unless you have ready and secure access to oil. Now, the problem for the United States is that its control over oil is limited and reducing. In 1990, about 59% of its oil consumption came from domestic US sources. By 2010, that's expected to reduce to about 37–38%. The problem for America is that as its own domestic oil hydrocarbon resources reduce, the demand for oil worldwide, because of the rise of China and India, is fast escalating, and the only way to secure an absolutely certain access to oil is really to gain political, military control of the two areas where oil remains in its largest repositories. One of those is the Middle East. The Muslim countries by 2010 will control 60% of the world's oil and 95% of the oil export capacity in those countries in the Middle East. That's why they're so crucial. The only other large area, apart to some degree from West Africa, is the Caspian Sea basin. And that's the significance of Afghanistan. There are only two ways to get oil out of the Caspian basin. One is westward, and that is the pipeline which is at this moment now being completed. It's, I think, 1,100 kilometers long, the longest pipeline of the world. It goes from Baku in Azerbaijan to Tbilisi in Georgia, and then through to Ceyhan on the Mediterranean coast in Turkey. The other way is eastwards, and this is to bring the immense oil and gas resources in Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, Kazakhstan, through Afghanistan and Pakistan to India, to the West Indian coast, to the Enron plant at Dabhol, which was seriously at that stage with a problem which could only survive, despite the Enron having invested $3 billion into it. It would only survive if it could get access to cheap gas. So a lot of this is connected, I believe, to finding a way to secure for Bush's largest donor and contributor, the chairman of Enron, when it still existed, and who pleaded with the US administration to take the necessary action in order to strengthen that plant, which was otherwise doomed on the West Indian coast. But that involved control over Afghanistan and through Pakistan to that point. Those are the reasons, I believe, which really lie behind this whole project. I think Brzezinski's view centered on control of Central and perhaps Southeast Asia. And indeed, whilst Europe and the West has been the driving force in global political terms for the last 2 or 3 centuries, that is now shifting irrevocably and inexorably to Asia. And Central Asia, because of its oil resources, because of the size of the population, China and India themselves alone contain 2/5 of the world's population. That's where the new economic magnet, the colossal level of growth which we are seeing in China, with 1.3 billion population and 7 to 10% growth per year for the last decade, phenomenal growth. That's where the economic heartlands of the world are going to lie. And I think if America is going to achieve world domination, it has to counter the rise of China, and it has to control oil and other natural resources, which are found in enormous quantities in Asia, not least, of course, also in Russia. I don't think anyone in the US government knew that at 8:20 a.m. on the morning of the 11th of September that a plane was going to fly into the Twin Towers as it did. I don't think they had that kind of specific information, but they had an enormous quantity of warnings of a degree of precision which we don't know, because this information has never been declassified, and we don't know how precise it was. I suspect it was quite precise. They knew a great deal. They knew that it could involve aeroplanes, they knew it could involve hijackings, they knew perfectly well that slamming into buildings, some of the key targets in the United States, the military headquarters, the intelligence headquarters, the political headquarters in the White House, let alone such obvious symbols of American power as the Twin Towers. They knew that that could well happen. And there was enough evidence on the ground coming from around the world, and which was being given to them in considerable detail, that it is astonishing that it was not followed up. Now, you ask, why should that happen? I simply say that in the Project for the New America Century document, it does say chillingly that, and it's called Strengthening America's Defenses, if we are going to make America tomorrow's dominant force, their words, then it will take a long time, and I'm quoting their words, unless there is a catastrophic and catalyzing event, like a new Pearl Harbor. Those are their words, end of that quotation. Now that is very significant, because at Pearl Harbor on December the 7th, 1941, we now know that President Roosevelt had advanced information about the attack that was planned of the Japanese fleet on the American Sixth Fleet at Pearl Harbor in Hawaii, but that information never reached the Sixth Fleet. And a view which is widely held, but it is, to be fair, it is contested, but it does seem to fit the facts, is he saw the need to bring the US into the war, the Second World War, but he knew that there was great resistance in the US population. They didn't want to be part of what they saw as a European war, and the only way in which that could happen is if there was a public outrage on a massive scale. And there is a belief that that information was not passed on in order to secure the means by which America could be brought into the war. Now that is a very striking and momentous statement to make, but it has been made by many people, and it is very significant that the Project for the New America Century itself refers to this event as the trigger for shortening what would otherwise be a very long drawn-out process. And all that I can say is, let other people make their judgments about 9/11. If they think that the war on terrorism explains it, I would like to know why all the facts about the failure to respond before, at, and after can be explained. If they needed a trigger, then finding that an attack was planned was an exceedingly convenient pretext. And I think they used it.
Very cynical thing to do.
It is cynical, but governments, and people don't like to think of this, governments can be ruthless. And I don't think there is any doubt at all about the ruthlessness of this US administration. We now know that for the attack on Iraq, first of all, Rumsfeld, I believe on the very day of 9/11, was asking the CIA to find evidence connecting it with Iraq. He asked that same question 10 times. Every single time the CIA came back saying there was no evidence. It was linked with the Taliban, linked with bin Laden. There was no connection with Saddam Hussein or Iraq.